I'd like to throw it open now if you've got any questions of me or of Jamie, if there's anything you'd like to ask. I understand that some of you have friends or relatives who have Asperger's or speech and language problems. So if you've got difficulties or anything you'd like to ask me about the whole process that I used.
Good on you, girl.
Heather, just
Yes.
a question. Do you see Jamie eventually living in his own unit? And
That's what we're working towards. Jamie, do you see yourself living in your own place or at least a shared house with someone?
Bit close.
Close?
Somewhere a bit close between me and living with someone. Somewhere in between.
right,
Yeah, somewhere.
good.
Yeah, I have really had that in my mind since the beginning because as Sylvia will tell you, so many parents say, what will happen when I'm gone? You know, you've got to prepare for that happening, not that eventuality, that happening. So if you can, and what I've talked about with Jamie is when you're 21 or maybe 22, and I think it is a possibility if he shares with other people.
How old is Jamie? How
Oh,
old are you,
sorry.
Jamie?
I'm 19 and a half, is that okay?
Yes,
That's
19
good.
and a half.
Because May, I'm 19 and a half.
In May, you're 19 and a half, yes, because he was born the 1st of November. Yes. Yes, so Jamie has a part-time job at a horticultural nursery, and he goes to the RE twice a week in his car, and he dances and he's on Facebook, on their Facebook page afterwards.
Grow up!
That's what people do at the 19, hey? But yes, I do see an independent life. That is what I'm working towards. But probably independent in the sense that I live an independent life, which is sharing a house with friends. So there are people who can kind of help you, and knowing that I'll be on the end of the phone for the next few years saying, oh, this is what you should do with that bill, and this is what you should do with this, you know.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Yes, Adam?
Heather, I'm 32, I've never ironed a shirt, and
Well done.
I've never asked how to iron a shirt. I just want to say to Jamie, well done, mate.
Adam says, well done to you.
Hang him up.
I support you, Adam! Hell of a debut for you!
Yeah, that's right, but I just think it makes it so much easier if you're thinking in your mind now, what is the next skill that would be useful for my son? Not let's regiment it and plan it and attack it, but just what would be the next thing that really would help? And I must say, on Jamie's driving licence, on that issue, the theoretical was very difficult. Because it was like some questions where it said, you know, how many metres apart do two cyclists have to ride when riding on the same side of the road and not on pavement? You know, Jenny just couldn't follow the English at all. The the graphic ones where pictures of cars doing things. Oh yes, he's got right of way. He's got right of way next, and so on. But it went on, it took Jamie 6 times to get his theory learners. And in that time, after number 4, he said to me, why am I doing this? Why are you making me do this? And I said, because it's worth it. Yes, it is so worth it. And then he passed his practical first time. And that was almost 2 years ago.
That's great.
Any other questions? Yes.
You said that Jamie was slow to start to speak.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the early years of his language development?
Yes. When he was 2, well, when all my children were 2, because I'm very interested in language and I have studied many languages and I love conversation and I've written plays and I'm so involved in the word. When my children were 2, I made a list of their active vocabulary. And so my girls had an active vocabulary of 200 words at the age of 2. So that meant they generated those languages, not just passively understood, but they generated those words. With Jamie, it was about 20. And I knew that there was something wrong, but I didn't know what. And it wasn't until he had an epileptic fit at the age of about 4.5, 5, that we then went to a paediatrician, and in the follow-up sessions she said, I think he is on the autistic spectrum, and he needs help with his speech. But I privately kind of mourned it, but I didn't actually do anything, you know. And then later I thought, like, he was 10 when we had this conversation in the car, when I said, you know, Jamie, it's your turn, do something. He was 10, and I wanted him so much to learn, and I thought, I've missed all those years when I could have been doing something. I really felt it had gone by us, you know. But it wasn't.
So what happened in that? Who took over who was in charge of building up Jamie's vocabulary between, what did you say, about 4 and 10?
No one.
No one.
No one.
So it was,
No, it was just lurching from one crisis to another. We weren't. I didn't do anything in particular in it, but I regretted it afterwards.
But it wasn't a speech impediment. He would
He
absorbed words.
It is a speech impediment. It is a comprehension impediment. So that Jamie finds it difficult he finds it very easy to understand spatially and visually, but to understand in language is very difficult. So he actually went to the Glen Lydon School of Speech and Language Impaired Children, and he had to go through 2 IQ tests. One was verbal and the other was non-verbal. On the verbal test he scored 55, which is very low. On the non-verbal he scored 117, which is in the superior range of intelligence. And that is what they wanted to see before they would let him in as a pupil. They said he really is cobbled by language. His language doesn't help it, doesn't elucidate or whatever. And Jamie still struggles with that, but has an incredible ability to mimic films and characters from films. And so he'll often say things that slot in perfectly in the conversation, and you think it's really rather charming and rather funny. But does that answer your question? That really I did very little from 4 to 10. I was just coping with the behavioural problems.
But in that time he was at a speech therapy.
Yes, he did. We took him to Glen Lydon at about the age of 9, and he did have speech therapists working with him. But as I say in the book, one particular therapist, I thought it was impossible for Jamie to learn anything about conversation. What he was learning about was, for example, he learned, the Olympics were on, and he learned 25 different names for sports that were played at the Olympics. Well, I didn't want that. I didn't want him to have vocabulary. I wanted him to be able to pick up the phone when his grandma rang from England and say, "Hello, Grandma, how are you?" And he can do that now. Now he says, you know, like Mike, the journalist, said to me, "Is there any one occasion when you can remember feeling so proud of Jamie and like everything has been vindicated and so on?" And it just is when he says, every day when he says to me, you know, I'll say, "I'm going out to the shops now, Jamie." He'll say, "Oh, good, hope you have a good time." Because he knows that something is required.
Yeah.
It's that kind of, it's difficult to explain. It's not vocab, it's not grammar, it's the whole sense of the purpose of our communication. So.
I have a daughter the same age as Jamie, with not Asperger's but intellectual disability, and the communication's a problem because people will say, "Hi, how are you?" and she'll say, "Good," and where do you go from there?
And that's it. Yes, it's
So
the
it's
end.
knowing the
Yes.
tricks where to go from
So when Jamie was doing that, I would say to him, in front of the person, I would say, you know, in as kindly a way as possible, I would say, tell me some more.
Well,
Say a bit
I
more.
then remind her she should say, "How are you?" So that
Yes,
then you've got a way
yes.
of going, but it's
That's
still
right, and if you
not
can do
given.
that before the encounter, then that doesn't make them lose
How many
face or
times do you
anything.
keep doing it though?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I know. It goes on, it's a lifelong thing.
It's
but
just that ability to communicate, it's knowing
Yes.
where to go.
It's knowing
You
knowing
answer
that
the
something is
question, then
required
you
of
start.
you, and say when we got into body language, I remember once picking him up from a party, and he was really hunched over and low and glowering, and I said, I can tell from your body language you're not happy. And I used terms like that, even though when Jamie was 10 and his comprehension powers were about 3 or 4 year old, I used terms like body language, like work questions, like yes, no questions, like active listening. And I thought, well, if he can understand Dragon Ball Z Revolution 5, conversations. Yeah, he doesn't like it now.
Well, no, it's not like I don't like it. It's just I got a whole heap of stuff to look forward to.
Sarah.
I was just going to say that one of the things that has always struck me about Jamie is when I first met him, because I worked at Glenleadon, when I first met him at Glenleadon, he was such an angry boy.
Oh, yeah.
So angry, he didn't know what to do with that anger.
Yeah.
And then after he had left and a young adult, and I met him one day at Indrapilli, and he had a conversation with me. And
Oh,
he said,
really?
hello Sarah, he came up and I didn't see him, he came up to me and he said, what are you doing now and how are you? And
Oh, really?
this is the same boy that couldn't control his anger.
You got the before and after.
Yeah.
Whereas when I'm living with Jamie, I don't really see that. It's only when I look back on my notes, you know, my diaries and my letters and my emails to people, and I think, oh my goodness, yes, I do remember that.
And I think that when people have children with a learning difficulty and they're in the middle of it, they can't see the future.
Yes.
Whereas because I teach children and I see them all the way through, I can see that they do grow and they do change
Yeah.
and they're growing to lovely young adults and do. So, yeah.
Okay, yes, just one more.
Heather, just following on from that point, I'm in awe of the fact that you found the time and energy to diarise and to record what you were doing as you were doing it. And that process is kind of clearly...
Yeah, I really didn't do it in a systematic way.
Sure.
It was all over the place and at any time. And I kept a I wrote things up on the computer, but I also had a beautiful, you know, one of those nicely bound books you can get from the newsagents or the Scribblers or whatever, and they're blank pages. I had those, and I might only write in once every 2 or 3 weeks, and it was just a little anecdote in absolute fact of about half a page. It really didn't take that much time invested, and I'm not meticulous about it. I ended up with notes all over the place, and they really were a bit of a mess. But you know, it's taken 8 years writing, 9 years writing this book, and it was just done in pieces, in bits, in between the rest of life.
When you started doing that, did you have in mind why? I'm fascinated about what the
Yes.
impetus to start doing that was.
Yes, I did, because I'm a writer. I've written books, ESL textbooks, and a lot of them, and so I could see there was a book in this because it hit me like, wow, why don't I just tell Jamie what's going on and ask him to mimic? And it really was that simple. And once I started doing that, it took a long time to help him forgive himself, because he would get so angry at himself. Do you remember that, love? Do you remember? You used to, you'd get angry and you'd throw something or whatever, and then you'd say to me, oh, I'll never be good, I'll never be good. Do you remember that now?
Yeah, I don't want to answer that guy.
Yeah, that's right.
So does that answer your question? It was on and off. It wasn't coherent. It was bits of things, but they prompted my memory later. And yes, I did realise when I hit on it. I thought and that's why I've called it conversation strategies. It's a bit of a mouthful. Talk to me, conversation strategies because at the end of each chapter I give practical advice, just tip 1, tip 2, this is what you should do, this is a suggestion that worked with me. And there are lots of them. There was one chapter which I think didn't end up in the final version called Praising Nothing, which was when I took Jamie and Katie, my middle daughter, to a prom which was being held on a boat in the riverside, and then we had to get to that dock and we were late getting there, and Katie was going crazy and screaming, we're not going to make it, we're not going to make it. And Jamie usually got very upset whenever the emotions got higher and higher, ratcheted up. And he didn't, and he just followed us out, and we ran down the dockside, and there was Katie in the boat. She got on the boat, and when we turned around and he was still calm, I said, "That is wonderful." And he was totally "That's wonderful, what have I done?"
Yeah.
I said, "You are doing nothing. Katie was screaming, you did nothing. Katie was getting angry, you did nothing. You kept us all calm." And then he started to say that he wanted to be a man of peace, and that's what Sylvia said. You know, he'd say, I want to be a man of peace. I want to be a man of peace. But, you know, you can praise nothing. You can praise the absence of a tantrum, because there were so often tantrums. Oh, so what, yes?
Heather, how have you dealt with this thing that people now have perfect children? Everyone has scans and all this stuff, and they all have a perfect baby, and life is meant to be, you know.
You know what I would say? I would
it's not
say,
reality.
don't ever get embarrassed by your child. I really believe that strongly. Because if you get embarrassed, you are worried that they are imperfect. You are concerned about how other people are taking them. You love that child fiercely, and do not, just refuse to be embarrassed. Because if you go on the autism parents site, or Asperger's or whatever, they've constantly, on Facebook, they've constantly got little posters saying, you know, I'm a fierce mama bear and I'll defend my son, and please forgive my child for what he or she does, and all that. I think that perfection is not something that I want to go for in my life or my children's lives. I want them to be the best that they can be, and while they're struggling to be that, I will refuse to be embarrassed by them. Nobody else is going to make me do something to tell my child off if I don't feel they deserve it. Certainly will if I feel they do. Yeah. Adam, did you have a... Yeah. Okay, yes.
I think that was really fascinating. I think we should all thank Heather for such Thanks also to Sylvia for her great introduction.
Yes.